Former Prime Minister Liz Truss has helped launch a new political faction in a bid to rally right-wing Tory MPs ahead of the general election. Popular Conservatism, dubbed PopCon, is described as a movement aimed at restoring democratic accountability across the country. The new group aims to pile pressure on Rishi Sunak by lobbying for more hardline measures on issues including immigration and lowering taxes. In her speech, Liz Truss said Britain is full of, and I quote, secret conservatives.
For years and years and years, and I think it goes back 2 decades, Conservatives have not taken on the left-wing extremists. Now, these people have repurposed themselves. They don't admit they're socialists or communists anymore. They say they're environmentalists. They say that they're in favour of helping people across all communities. They are in favour of supporting LGBT people or groups of ethnic minorities. So they no longer admit that they are collectivists, but that is what their ideology is about. It's all about taking power away from people and families and giving power to the state or unaccountable bodies.
I know, it's time for me to talk. I know that, but I'm just trying to digest. This is my reaction. What? What did she say? Join me in the studio. I hope they'll explain it. TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell. Hi, Peter.
Hi. And
Scarlett Maguire, director at JL Partners Polls. Nice to see you. But what was she talking about? Collectivism? People who... I didn't get where she was going with this. I don't really understand her point or the philosophy of this new faction, Peter. Maybe you can explain.
Well, it's interesting because if you want to be a political theorist about it, and I don't really, Liz Truss is sort of a mixture of classic liberalism alongside a bit of conservatism and is a bit of social conservatism together. But really, the PopCons, Popular Conservatives, are identifying problems as they see it. Liz Truss talking about things being too woke. For example, gender ideology is something she talked about as well. Environmentalism, she says net zero isn't something that she can get on board with. And other kind of points that she made and other speakers made, people like Lee Anderson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and others. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that we're still not fully Brexited because the tentacles of the EU, especially their courts and other European courts, are within our regulation, within our system. So that's sort of what they believe. But in terms of solutions, I'm not sure there really was a huge number of solutions being put forward for what they want, apart from, well, you know, someone like Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister again, and look how that turned out after 49 days. So part of me thinks that I was there today and it was a very full hall and there were a lot of people who really believe what Liz Truss was saying. But also the background of that is Simon Clarke, who's one of her real supporters in the Conservative Party, said that Rishi Sunak should be removed a couple of weeks ago. That fell flat on its face, absolute tumbleweed. Today, actually, Kwasi Kwarteng, who was Liz Truss's Chancellor, says he's leaving Parliament. He's leaving a elected political life anyway, and that is, that came on the same day as she's outlining a sort of economic plan on how she thinks things should work. So it's a very strange faction, but at the same time, and there are so many of them, of course, with five others. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, the five families, and this is another one.
Well, soon we'll have, I can't believe it's not the Conservative Party, the Conservative tooth kind. So there is this idea, I think, the idea is these people are getting together to basically say, when Rishi Sunak loses the election, which I think is a when rather than an if, we told you so, if only you'd done what we said, you would have won. And also things like democratic accountability, people not connecting, politicians not connecting with people, which is a big issue. There's no doubt about that, although arguably Liz Truss actually contributed to that. But also, if the Conservative Party is to be reformed, what should it actually look like? And Liz Truss, perhaps, well, I'm sure she's not going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, but people around her will be thinking, actually, where is this going to go after the next election?
Scarlett Maguire, is there an appetite among the potential voting public for another Conservative faction? Question one. Question two, is there an appetite for another Conservative faction headed by Liz Truss at this juncture? And question three, are they talking about the right issues anyway? Does anyone really understand what democratic accountability actually means, what collectivism is? And when she was listing all the things that she doesn't like, she said, people who think that they're going to help the community, what's wrong with that? People who, champion the rights of LGBT, the LGBT community, people who, look after families from ethnic minorities, as if these are terrible things and everyone's going to hate people for doing that. But why does she even think that in the first place? You are the pollster amongst us. Tell me whether she's scoring with all of this or whether she's really tanking.
Yeah, I mean, on your first point, I think there is no public appetite for any more Conservative factions. People have sort of had it up to here, especially with the last few years of ramming inside the Conservative Party and that spilling out. So I think that's absolutely true. On your second point, I think it's wrong for it to be fronted by Liz Truss. She was talking there as if she hadn't already been Prime Minister and tried to implement these things and failed quite spectacularly.
Yeah.
And then on your third point, is this the sort of thing that people are looking for? I mean, I think there is something to be said by picking a direction and sticking to it, given the lack of direction we've seen from Rishi Sunak's administration, especially in the last 6 months. However, slightly leaving back to the second point, not sure this particular flavour of it is going to get much traction.
Is there, Scarlett, do you think any kind of irony in Liz Truss, one of the least popular prime ministers in history, heading up a faction called PopCon, Popular Conservatism?
I won't be the first to point out that I think it probably is quite ironic.
Yeah,
no, she is, you know, there aren't many popular politicians about these days, not in the UK, that's for sure. Rishi Sunak's unpopular, Keir Starmer's unpopular. Liz Truss is a whole new level of unpopular. In fact, she bottomed out a lot of those charts.
Yes, and Peter, her sort of henchmen and women sitting there at the PopCon. Just Jacob Rees-Mogg and you know, and all the greats. I mean, who else was there sitting?
Well, Lee Anderson was there as well. He gave a speech about net zero. Also, interestingly, Nigel Farage was there, sort of as an observer. He is a broadcaster as well, as we know. But also, I interviewed him and talked to him about whether he thought what he thought this was about, essentially. And he sort of agreed with me, really, that there were lots of ideas, there were lots of complaints, really, from a lot of the people within this, but no clear direction or where it was really going or what it was. We knew what it was against, but not really what it was for. So that was kind of interesting as well. You had people like Jake Berry there as well, who wouldn't be a member of this kind of faction of the Conservative Party, but nonetheless there as a sort of interested observer. But the interesting thing is, you know, the name is Popular Conservatism rather than the Conservative Party itself. So conservatism, obviously wider than that. But also, it's got to appeal to the Conservative Party. But we had probably about 10 MPs there out of 300 odd. So there wasn't a huge popularity within the Conservative Party for this. And I think, as Suella Braverman found when she ran for leadership, as Simon Clarke found with that tumbleweed a couple of weeks ago, for this brand of conservatism, there actually isn't a lot of support within the Conservative Party anyway. Some would argue that Reform UK, and actually Nigel Farage held up the leaflet when he was talking to me and said, like, a lot of these things are sort of photocopied from our
We can
manifesto.
actually see him now. This is Nigel Farage in action. Maybe Scarlett will comment on this.
We may well be at one of those strange moments in history when something that's been around for a couple of hundred years just dies and disappears. It effectively happened to the Liberals 100 years ago. These things do happen once a century. I don't know. They're going to lose the next election. Maybe they reform and change afterwards. Or maybe, rather like Canada 30 years ago, maybe we're at one of those moments where they simply need to be replaced.
One of the kind of ideas that are being touted today that you think Rishi Sunak should adopt, can he possibly turn it around, or is it just not going to happen?
Oh, no. This is way too late. You know, the sense of betrayal that millions of voters feel, the optimism of that 2019 manifesto, the feeling that not only did they not deliver it, but they never actually believed in it when they put it to the public. No, it can't be turned around. There's nothing you can do to turn it around.
I wonder what you think the polls would show if you asked for public reaction to that. Maybe they think very sensible, he's absolutely right, and he's saying the unsayable, which is maybe the Conservative Party and all it stands for, the Tories, are a finite party heading for extinction, and he's saying it and people think, oh yeah, maybe.
Actually, broadly speaking, I think he might be right on this one, which is not to say that the Conservatives are finished for by any means. I think their chances, he's right about their chances at the next election. Sort of most people now put it next to nothing. I don't see how it gets turned around between now and then, no matter what happens with the economy or anything else. Yeah, in terms of the end of the Conservative Party, I think firstly we'll have to see what the defeat looks like for them, how bad it is. Secondly, I think it'll be interesting, and I think this will matter a lot for the sort of what Nigel's talking about there, is about how many seats Reform ended up taking from them. Now, it's always quite a crude analysis to try and work that out. Well, you can, is it not take an MP, sorry, but how many seats that Reform gift to Labour or the Lib Dems?
Because they've topped the Conservative vote. Yeah.
Exactly, which I think, you know, you could be looking at 100, maybe more even, maybe less. Obviously, it's quite crude to work that out. It's not an exact science, but it can be broadly, yes?
And actually, sorry to interrupt you, but actually within that, I did talk to Nigel Farage about that and said about 2019, and he was saying that the deal that was done with the Conservative Party in 2019 for reform not to stand in the vast majority of seats, under no circumstances will that be done with the Conservative Party this time. Apologies to interrupt
No,
you.
absolutely right. And I think that's exactly it. And I think at the moment, it looks like Nigel Farage and Reform want to inflict as much damage as possible to the Conservatives and actually kill them off so that they can replace them or reform them in their own image. And we'll see how they get on with that.
Liz Truss making free with the term woke, Peter. Obviously, our very own Piers Morgan, big fan of that word, likes it, writes books about it, talks about it all the time. So do many of my colleagues on this station. When she invokes that word, do you think, and I'm going to ask her the same question, but do you think that the public rises as one and thinks, yes, you know, exterminate wokeism, this is something we think about day and night, we don't like things that are woke? Or do you think the public doesn't think about wokeism very much at all and doesn't care very much at all?
It's an interesting thing. I think the people who care very, very much about things that they think are woke. I suppose it's an extension of the sort of PC gone mad ideas that people had previously. So the people who care a lot. But if you look at the trans issue, is a perfect example of this. They're only, I mean, Scarlett is the expert in this, but there are sort of any poll I've seen, you're talking about single figure, I think, numbers of people who say it's a top issue for them. The big issues that people really care about are the NHS, the cost of living, probably the top one, and things like immigration, crime, the environment is another aspect as well. So woke aspects, of course, come into some of that as well. But in terms of simply saying we want to be anti-woke, that's not an election-winning slogan.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think even the term woke actually now does sound a little bit outdated. I hope sort of no colleagues mind me saying that, but it feels actually slightly retro now. And I think actually especially when we go around talking to people in focus groups, what people are really worried about is the economy, the NHS, immigration as well, which obviously some people might class under that sort of banner. But yeah, I don't think just talking about woke issues is going to cut it.
Let me talk to you a little bit about the fallout from Rishi Sunak's interview with our very own Piers Morgan here on TalkTV. It couldn't be ignored. There were, you know, many political sketch writers really got their teeth and claws into this particular thing and said that it was very much as if Piers Morgan was occupying the august position, you know, was the senior of the two, was the one who needed to be taken most seriously, and Rishi Sunak, the kind of fawning supplicant begging for the favour of Piers Morgan. Now, I mean, you watched it, you will have had a view. What did you think, Peter?
Well, I think the biggest controversy about that interview is about the bet that Piers Morgan mentioned in regard to whether the planes would take off and asylum seekers would actually go to Rwanda. That has really divided opinion on social media, in the papers, various people who saw it. Some people think absolutely fine. Other people think, well, actually, no, this is perhaps a bit tasteless. Labour had certainly put that out on a statement. But also, I think it got to the core of the issue in terms of saying what is going to happen on that and the 5 pledges that Piers went through methodically in terms of saying, you know, you have failed on the NHS, for example, which Rishi Sunak said that he had. It was really only one of the pledges in terms of getting the inflation to a degree under control, still going up by around 4%, that was something that was still happening. So it's certainly a very controversial interview, but one that everybody's talking about. And even the fact, you know, still the fact that it wasn't even shown at 8 o'clock last night on our network because of what was happening with Charles. So it wasn't shown until 11, but of course it was shown on YouTube as well. So it's been very, very popular.
Tremendous
reaction. It's got people talking.
Absolutely. What were your impressions of it, Scarlett?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it was a very good example of something that we've seen a lot over the last year, which is that Rishi Sunak, I don't think, is very good at politics. And I think actually, I saw some people say, well, he'd, you know, damned if he did, damned if he didn't with that bet. But actually, I do think by far the more sensible thing would have been to say, I'm not going to bet on that, you know, for whatever reason. I think it played into people's...
It's puerile. You could say it's trivial.
I think there
you
are
could say it trivialises something
ways.
very important. You could say, listen, I'm not walking into that one, Piers. Seems like a very poor idea to me. I'm not a betting man. Ha ha.
Yeah.
You can say many things. You don't just have to go, yeah, I'm putting 1,000 quid
Exactly.
on it,
And I think the fact that, you know, voters already think he's too out of touch to be able to understand their concerns, placing a £1,000 bet on something like that, I think makes it worse.
Yes. And Kwasi Kwarteng saying not standing in the next election.
Yeah, well, I think his career is over. There's no way that even if a miracle were to happen and Rishi Sunak were to win the next election, there's no chance that Rishi Sunak would bring back Kwasi Kwarteng in any way, or any Conservative leader really, unless it's someone from the Liz Truss sort of side of the House that comes through, which I don't think would happen. So I think Kwasi Kwarteng has probably seen the writing on the wall. There are quite a few Conservative MPs, 5 of them this week, who said, and within the last week, who said they're standing down. And of course, a lot of them are looking for jobs and realise that their MP seats will go, and there's nothing as an ex-MP.
Thank you both very much. It's good to see you.